Get up, right now, and take your bag with you, because you do not belong in this seat." That was the first thing Deborah Winslow said to him. Not hello, not good evening, just an order delivered in the clipped, icy tone of a woman who has spent 24 years deciding who deserves comfort and who does not. The man she said it to did not move. He did not even open his eyes right away. He just sat there in seat 2A, hood up, sneakers still on, looking for all the world like a college kid who had wandered into the wrong part of the airport. His name was Marcus Bell. He was 20 years old. And 3 days earlier, Vantage Global Holdings, the parent company of Meridian Skyways, had paid $480 million for the small predictive maintenance software company Marcus had built with 2 friends in a rented garage outside Austin, Texas. The deal made him the youngest board member in the airline's history. Nobody on this airplane knew that yet, and that single gap in knowledge was about to nearly kill 311 people. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. Let's go back 6 hours to a gate at O'Hare International Airport in Chicago, where the rain was coming down in long gray sheets against the terminal windows, and a tired, young man in a faded navy hoodie was checking his phone for the 11th time that hour. Marcus had not slept in almost 2 days. His eyes were rimmed red, his curls flattened on one side from where he'd dozed against a wall outside gate B14. In his backpack, wedged between a laptop and a phone charger, was a small silver pen, scratched along one side, the plating worn thin from being carried in pockets for 6 years. Engraved along its barrel, in letters so faded you had to tilt it to the light to read them, was a single word: believe. It had belonged to his grandmother, Ruth Bell, who had cleaned hotel rooms on the south side of Chicago for 31 years before her knees gave out. She had given him the pen the day he got into college on a full scholarship, and she had said something to him that he had never forgotten and never would. "Baby, they are going to look at you and decide who you are before you say a single word. You cannot control that, but you can control whether you let them be right about you." He had carried that pen through every all-nighter, every investor meeting where men, twice his age, had explained his own algorithm back to him. Every moment a security guard in a Silicon Valley office lobby had asked to see his badge twice, while a white colleague walked past unchecked. He never mentioned any of it out loud. He just carried the pen and kept building. Now he was boarding a flight to London for the most important meeting of his life, an emergency session with Vantage's full executive board to finalize the software rollout across their entire fleet. He was exhausted down to his bones, wearing the same hoodie he'd had on for 2 days, because somewhere between the acquisition closing and the flight, sleep had become a luxury he could no longer afford. He found seat 2A, dropped into it, and was asleep before the seatbelt sign even chimed. He did not see Deborah Winslow watching him from the galley. Deborah had been a flight attendant for Meridian Skyways for 24 years, and in that time, she had built a private religion out of the first-class cabin. To her, it was not simply a section of the aircraft. It was a hierarchy made visible, a place where the natural order of who mattered and who did not was supposed to be self-evident to anyone with eyes. She had served governors and hedge fund managers, and a former Secretary of State. She prided herself, loudly and often, on being able to tell within 3 seconds of boarding whether someone belonged in her cabin. So when she turned from arranging warm cashews on a silver tray and saw a young man in a hoodie, slumped in 2A, something in her chest went cold and certain. The way it always did right, before she decided she was right about something. She turned to her junior colleague, a 26-year-old flight attendant named Priya Nair, who was scrolling through the manifest on a tablet. "Who is that in 2A?" Deborah said, though her tone made clear it was not really a question. Priya glanced down. "Says here it's a Mr. M. Bell. Corporate account booking, flagged VIP, Direct billing through Vantage Global Holdings. Deborah's mouth curled slightly. VIP. Look at him, Priya. He looks like he snuck out of coach and found an empty seat before we did the count. You know how they do that. Priya hesitated. The system shows the seat is assigned to him, Deborah. It's not a mismatch. Systems glitch, Deborah said. Already smoothing her skirt, already walking. People screenshot passes. People borrow corporate logins that aren't theirs. I've seen it 100 times. I am not starting this flight with a stowaway in my cabin. And that is how she arrived at seat 2A, hovering over a sleeping 20-year-old with a tight, professional smile that did not reach anywhere near her eyes. Get up, right now. Marcus blinked awake, disoriented, the cabin lights swimming into focus. I'm sorry, he said, voice thick with exhaustion. Did you need something? I need you out of this seat, sir. First-class boarding is for premium passengers. Economy is toward the back. I'd hate for you to miss the departure looking for your actual seat. I'm not lost, Marcus said quietly. This is my seat. He pulled out his phone, thumbed open his digital wallet, and held the glowing boarding pass up toward her. Bell M. Seat 2A. Class, first. Deborah looked at the screen the way a jeweler looks at a diamond she has already decided is fake. Anyone can screenshot a pass, she said. I'll need a government ID now. Around them, a few heads had begun to turn. In seat 3A, a silver-haired man in a $2,000 suit lowered his newspaper just enough to watch, clearly enjoying himself. His name was Preston Callahan, a hedge fund manager from Greenwich, Connecticut, and he had the particular smugness of a man who has never once in his life been asked to prove he belonged anywhere. Marcus, jaw tight but voice still level, reached into his backpack, passed the silver pen, and pulled out his wallet. He handed over his driver's license without a word. Deborah held it up to the cabin light, turning it over twice, scanning the hologram like she expected it to confess something. Marcus Bell, she read aloud, her voice thin with something that wasn't quite doubt and wasn't quite certainty either. That's me, Marcus said. Can I have it back and go to sleep now? She did not give it back. Instead, she said the words that would end up haunting the next 40 minutes of her career. I need to verify this with the captain. Do not move. And here is where you need to pay close attention. Because what happens in the next 10 minutes is the reason 311 people nearly did not make it to London alive. Hold that thought. We will come back to it. Deborah marched to the forward galley, snapped at Priya to call the gate agent and pull the payment records for seat 2A, and within 4 minutes had convinced herself, with the particular fervor of someone protecting her own pride rather than the truth, that Marcus Bell had somehow stolen a corporate card belonging to Vantage Global Holdings. She wanted security. She wanted the captain. She wanted, more than anything else in that moment, to be right. 9 minutes later, Captain Gerald Whitfield walked down the aisle with 2 armed airport security officers behind him, and the entire first-class cabin went so silent you could hear the hydraulic whir of the cabin door still sealing shut. Son? Captain Whitfield said, his voice carrying the practiced calm of a man who has flown for 22 years and hates nothing more than a delayed departure. My flight attendant tells me there's a serious discrepancy with your ticket. This card was used to purchase a first-class seat under a corporate executive account. Are you an employee of Vantage Global? Marcus looked up at him, and for the first time that night, something steady and unbothered came into his voice. The same steadiness his grandmother used to have when hotel guests screamed at her over towels that were never actually missing. I'm not an employee, Captain. I'm the reason that account exists. My company was acquired by Vantage Global 3 days ago. I'm flying to London for the board meeting that finalizes the deal. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Preston Callahan burst out laughing from 3A, a short, ugly bark of a laugh. Oh, that's rich, he said. The kid in the hoodie is a tech executive. Sure. And I'm the Pope. Just get off the plane, kid, before this gets embarrassing for you. Deborah's mouth twisted into something like triumph. You see, Captain? He's lying. 19, 20 years old, dressed like that, and he expects us to believe he's on the board. I want him removed. 20 years old, Marcus corrected quietly, and I'm not moving. The security officers took a step forward, hands drifting toward their belts, waiting for the captain's word. This is the moment. This is exactly the moment where most people would have panicked, begged, or exploded. Marcus did none of those things. He reached into his backpack, passed the worn silver pen, and pulled out his phone. "What are you doing?" Deborah snapped. "No calls. Put that away." "Actually," Marcus said, and something in his voice had shifted entirely, gone flat and precise and unmistakably in charge. "I am going to make a call, and you are going to stand right there and wait." He dialed a number, put the phone on speaker, and set it on the armrest. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a booming voice filled the frozen cabin. "Marcus, my boy, tell me you're already in the air. London's breathing down my neck about the rollout timeline." Every single person in first class leaned forward without realizing they were doing it. "Hey, Walter," Marcus said, eyes locked on Deborah's face as the color began draining from it in real time. "I'm on the plane, but there's a delay. Your flight crew doesn't believe I belong in first class. Your senior flight attendant just called airport security to have me removed for allegedly stealing a corporate card." There was a silence on the line so complete you could hear the rain still hitting the fuselage outside. Then Walter Ashcroft's voice came back, and it was no longer booming or warm. It was ice. "Put the captain on the phone, now." Captain Whitfield's hand actually shook slightly as he lifted the receiver, and Deborah Winslow, 24 years of iron composure evaporating in real time, took one small step backward, as though putting distance between herself and the phone might undo the last 9 minutes. "This is Captain Whitfield, sir." "Captain, this is Walter Ashcroft, CEO of Vantage Global Holdings. 3 days ago, my company paid $480 million for the predictive maintenance software written by the young man currently sitting in your first-class cabin. That software is about to be installed across our entire fleet, including the aircraft you are piloting tonight. So, I am going to ask you one time. Why is my newest board member being threatened with removal by armed security on my own airline?" Captain Whitfield's face had gone the color of old paper. "Sir, there was a misunderstanding about the ticket purchase." Miss Winslow believed. "I don't care what Miss Winslow believed," Ashcroft said, and his voice cracked through the cabin speaker port like a whip. "I care what is true. The ticket is legitimate. The identification is legitimate. The only fraud on that airplane tonight is the fraud of judging a passenger by a hooded sweatshirt instead of a boarding pass. Winslow, are you there?" Deborah's throat worked twice before anything came out. "Yes, Mr. Ashcroft. I was following security protocol regarding a discrepancy in the passenger profile. He didn't fit the standard demographic for—" "Do not finish that sentence," Ashcroft said, quiet now, which was somehow worse than the shouting. "You built a policy out of your own prejudice, and you are about to call it protocol in front of 300 witnesses. Captain, remove her from the aircraft. I want her suspended without pay, effective immediately, pending a full internal review." Somewhere in row 6, a passenger had already lifted a phone and started filming. Nobody stopped them. Deborah's carefully painted composure did not just crack. It shattered, all at once, in front of every single person she had spent 24 years training herself never to be seen breaking down in front of. "Please," she said, voice cracking. 24 years. Please don't do this in front of everyone." And here is the part that surprised everybody on that airplane, including Deborah herself. Marcus leaned toward the phone. "Walter, it's Marcus. If you pull her now, we lose our slot and I lose 2 hours I don't have. Let her stay on." But she works the back galley for the rest of the flight. Not first class, not anywhere near me. Deborah stared at him, stunned, mascara already ruined, unable to understand why the person she had humiliated was the one keeping her job. That single act, quiet, controlled, without a trace of vengeance in it, would matter enormously in about 90 minutes. Hold on to that, too. She walked the long, silent aisle toward the rear galley, past every passenger who had just watched her fall apart in real time. And Preston Callahan suddenly found something extremely interesting to read in the safety card in front of him. The flight pushed back 9 minutes later. 3 hours in, cruising at 39,000 feet, over the Black Atlantic, somewhere north of Bangor, Maine. The cabin was dark except for reading lights, and Marcus was not sleeping. He was hunched over his laptop, watching lines of green telemetry cascade down the screen of the Aeropulse Dynamics dashboard. The software his company had spent 4 years building to catch mechanical failures before pilots ever saw a warning light. At 2:14 in the morning, a cluster of data points on his screen flashed yellow. He sat up straight, isolated the anomaly. It was coming from the right wing, the hydraulic actuator controlling the outboard aileron. Standard cockpit instruments would read the pressure as perfectly normal. But Aeropulse wasn't reading pressure. It was reading the rate of vibration change, the microscopic thermal drift no factory sensor was built to notice. And the model was now predicting a catastrophic seal failure within roughly 40 minutes. His heart started to hammer. This was exactly the failure his software was built to catch. It had simply never been tested on a plane at 39,000 feet, with 311 people on board. He unbuckled, grabbed the laptop, and moved fast toward the forward galley to reach the interphone. The curtain to the flight deck area was drawn. He pushed through it, and there, blocking the interphone with a stack of plastic cups in her hands, red-eyed and simmering with 3 hours of humiliation, was Deborah Winslow. She had slipped forward from the rear galley, in direct violation of Marcus's condition, and the sight of him reaching for the cockpit phone lit something furious and wounded in her, all at once. "What do you think you're doing?" "I need to reach the captain," Marcus said, holding up the screen. "There's a hydraulic failure developing in the right wing. My software is showing a seal blowout in under 40 minutes. "Return to your seat," she said, planting herself directly between him and the phone. "Passengers do not approach the flight deck. It's a federal offense, and frankly, after tonight, I would think you'd want to avoid giving me any more reasons to call security." "You don't understand, Deborah. This isn't about tonight, this is." "I understand perfectly," she snapped, voice shaking with something raw and ugly. "You humiliated me. You had me demoted to serving ginger ale in coach, in front of a plane, full of people who will remember my face for the rest of their lives. And now you want to march up to that cockpit door and tell a 22-year veteran pilot how to fly his own airplane because a laptop told you to." "It is not a game," Marcus said, his own voice hardening now. "It's the software your airline paid $500 million for. Step aside." "No," she said, and something dangerous flickered behind her eyes, some final, desperate need to be right about something tonight. "If you touch that phone, I will declare a Level 2 security threat, and federal law will require the captain to lock down that flight deck no matter who you claim to be, board member or not." She was right about the law, and they both knew it. Marcus glanced down at his screen. The yellow cluster had gone orange. The vibration frequency was climbing. "Deborah," he said, quieter now, almost pleading, "I don't care about the argument we had. I am telling you as an engineer, this aircraft has a developing structural fault, and if you don't let me reach the flight deck, we are going to lose hydraulic control over the ocean." For 1/2 of 1 second, something in her hesitated. What if he was right? What if 300 people were about to pay for her pride? Then her wounded ego roared back, louder than her doubt. "Sit down," she said, ice in her voice. or I hit the panic button myself. The aircraft lurched violently to the left. A deep metallic groan rolled through the floorboards. The cabin lights flickered and died, replaced instantly by the harsh white strobe of emergency lighting. Deborah was thrown against the galley counter, plastic cups exploding across the floor, her eyes suddenly wide with a fear that had nothing to do with pride anymore. The seal had not waited 40 minutes. It had blown right then. Somewhere behind them, the cabin erupted in screaming. Overhead bins burst open, luggage raining into the aisles. Preston Callahan, the man who had laughed at Marcus 6 hours earlier, was now sobbing openly, both hands locked around his armrests, his knuckles white as bone. Marcus did not freeze. He braced against the bulkhead, laptop still gripped in one hand, and lunged for the interphone before Deborah could stop him. There was no more argument to have. There was only a plane falling. "Captain Whitfield," he shouted into the receiver over the roar of wind tearing past the fuselage. "This is Marcus Bell. Listen to me now." Inside the cockpit, alarms were screaming, the ground proximity system barking its mechanical warning, the control yoke fighting Captain Whitfield's hands as he and his first officer wrestled the aircraft level. "I don't have time, Bell," Whitfield barked back. "We've lost the right outboard aileron. Hydraulic pressure is bleeding into the center manifold. If we lose the center system, we lose the horizontal stabilizer entirely." "You are not bleeding into the center manifold," Marcus shouted, scanning the red telemetry cascading across his screen. "Your standard sensors are giving you a phantom reading off wing vibration. The actual leak is isolated to the secondary actuator valve on the right side. If you shut down the right engine hydraulic pump right now, it will not touch the center system. Standard protocol says, leave it on to preserve whatever pressure is left." Whitfield shot back, sweat pouring down his temple. "If you leave it on," Marcus said, voice unnervingly steady, even as the plane bucked beneath him, "the pressure will shred the secondary manifold in under 90 seconds and you will lose your ability to pitch the nose up at all. Shut it down now." For one impossible second, Captain Whitfield hesitated, 22 years of ingrained procedure screaming at him not to trust a laptop over Boeing's own warning systems. Then he thought about the $480 million. Vantage Global had just paid for exactly this software. And he thought about the calm, unshaking voice on the other end of the interphone. "Shut down the right engine pump," he ordered his first officer. "Execute." The toggle switch flipped. For 3 of the longest seconds of Marcus Bell's life, the aircraft groaned in protest, pitching forward into a sickening half-second of weightlessness. And then, slowly, the red spikes on his screen flatlined. The center system pressure stabilized, locked into green. The Boeing shuddered, steadied, and stopped its violent bank. "Pressure holding," Marcus said into the phone, his voice finally shaking now that the crisis had passed. "Center system is stable. You have pitch control." Captain Whitfield's voice came back thick with disbelief and adrenaline. "We're declaring a mayday. Diverting to Bangor International. 40 minutes out." "Understood," Marcus said, and slid down the galley wall onto the floor, utterly spent. Across from him, still sitting amid the wreckage of scattered plastic cups, Deborah Winslow stared at him with an expression that had nothing left of pride in it at all. She had heard everything. She had heard him diagnose a structural failure the airline's own sensors had missed, argue a veteran captain into a decision that saved the airplane, and she understood with perfect, sickening clarity what would have happened if she had made good on her threat 90 seconds earlier. If she had hit that panic button out of nothing but wounded pride, the cockpit would have locked. The data would never have reached the pilots. 311 people, herself included, would be somewhere in the freezing Atlantic right now instead of stabilizing at 31,000 feet. "Get up," Marcus said, and there was no anger left in his voice, only exhaustion and something that sounded almost like pity. You have a cabin full of terrified people who think they're about to die. Go do your job." She got up. For the first time in 24 years, the practiced professional smile was completely gone from her face, replaced by something raw and desperate to be useful. She moved seat to seat, checking belts, holding trembling hands, kneeling beside Preston Callahan until his breathing slowed from a full panic into something survivable. The landing at Bangor International Airport, 38 minutes later, was brutal. Without the right hydraulic system, the crew had to drop the landing gear manually using gravity and compressed air. The aircraft hit the runway hard, bounced once, and screamed to a stop in a shower of sparks off the wet tarmac. For 10 full seconds, nobody in that cabin made a sound. Then the applause started, rolling forward from economy in one long, tearful wave. Captain Whitfield stepped out of the cockpit 40 minutes later, tie loose, shirt soaked through with sweat, looking a decade older than the man who had boarded in Chicago. He found Marcus still sitting against the galley wall and pulled him to his feet with a firm, shaking handshake. "I've flown for 22 years, he said quietly. "I thought I knew this aircraft cold. If you hadn't been on this flight, we would not have made it to Bangor. Your software saved every single one of us tonight." "You flew the plane, Captain," Marcus said. "The software just gave you the map." Deborah approached last, hanging back like she was afraid to get too close to something she had nearly destroyed. "Mr. Bell," she said, voice trembling but steady enough to finish the sentence. "I don't expect forgiveness. I looked at you and made a decision about who you were before you said a single word, and I let my pride push me so far that I almost got everyone on this airplane killed, rather than admit I might be wrong." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "You're right," he said finally, "and I'm not going to pretend I forgive you tonight. You humiliated me in front of strangers, and then you nearly cost 300 people their lives to protect your own ego. But when the plane started going down and I told you to get up and do your job, you did it. You didn't fall apart completely. That matters. It doesn't erase the rest, but it matters." He picked up his backpack, the worn silver pen still tucked safely inside, and walked off the aircraft without waiting for a response. The story of Flight 217 was national news by sunrise. Not the story Deborah Winslow would have chosen to be remembered for. Vantage Global's internal investigation, launched the following week, turned up something far worse than one bad night. 2 prior complaints against Deborah Winslow surfaced from the company's own database, both filed years earlier by other passengers, both describing nearly identical incidents of profiling in the first-class cabin, both quietly closed without action, buried in a system that had learned to absorb complaints rather than address them. Deborah Winslow was terminated, not suspended, not offered a quiet exit with a severance check and a signature on a non-disclosure agreement. Terminated, on the record, with cause, and her case became the reason Vantage Global rewrote its entire complaint review process from the ground up. Captain Whitfield completed a mandatory 16-week leadership, retraining focused on bias intervention and the captain's duty to verify a claim before acting on someone else's certainty. He never once protested it. Priya Nair, the junior attendant who had quietly told Deborah the manifest, showed Marcus's seat was legitimate, was promoted within the year to lead flight attendant, and later became one of the first instructors in a new company-wide training program. 6 months after that flight, Marcus Bell stood at a podium in Vantage Global's Chicago headquarters, wearing, for the first time in a public setting, an actual blazer instead of a hoodie, though he still kept the silver pen in his breast pocket. He announced the launch of a permanent company initiative, one built to make sure no gate agent, no flight attendant, no captain could ever again let a hoodie decide who deserved to be believed. Walter Ashcroft wanted to name it after Marcus. Marcus said no, name it after what it's supposed to protect, he said. So they called it simply the boarding standard, and it became mandatory training for every single employee at every level of the company, gate agents and cabin crew, and executives alike, Walter Ashcroft included, who insisted on completing the very first course himself. Marcus never told his grandmother the full story of what happened on that flight for almost a year. When he finally did, sitting across from her at her small kitchen table on the south side of Chicago, she reached over, took the worn, silver pen out of his hand, turned it slowly in the light, and read the single faded word engraved on its side out loud, like she was hearing it for the first time. "Believe," she said. Then she looked up at her grandson, 20 years old, a board member, a man who had just saved 311 lives and asked nothing for himself in return. "Looks like you did," she said quietly, every step of the way. If this story stayed with you, not because of how it ended, but because you recognized someone in it, either the man who was doubted or the person too afraid to speak up when it mattered, hit like so, it reaches someone who needs to hear it tonight. Share it with anyone who has ever been judged before they got the chance to open their mouth. And tell me in the comments, honestly, have you ever been in that cabin? Which seat were you in? I read every single one.